Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for this info session today. I see a few more folks starting to join in here. Just so everyone knows, this is being recorded and we will be sharing a recording with everybody after the session. So welcome to another info session of the Columbia Climate School's non-degree programs. Some of you might be here for the first time, and I see a couple of you are returning. So thank you for joining us. For those of you who are new to the info session and our programs, welcome. The Climate School is extremely excited to be offering continuing to offer our professional learning opportunities online this spring. For those of you who may not know, the Columbia Climate School is a new school that was announced in July 2020, and it's actually the first new school at Columbia University in over 25 years. The new school will draw upon the university's strengths in the area of climate, earth, and society. And what we really want to do with the school is build a hub for existing world-class research, education, and practice efforts. And the Climate School encompasses everything that was part of the Earth Institute previously. So this professional learning opportunity started in September of 2020, thinking back. So this is still a fairly new effort. And what we're really hoping to do with these opportunities is engage learners who are interested in learning more about climate and sustainability outside of our degree programs, which require much longer time frame in terms of commitment. And so our non-degree efforts are non-credit workshops. There are no transcripts. Participants are not considered as Columbia students. They are open enrollment opportunities, so there are no applications in terms of joining a workshop. The workshops are led by the same instructors and staff and faculty members who teach in our regular degree programs. So you're getting the same high quality education that you would otherwise. And they're extremely flexible. And so we have tried our best to schedule these at times that we think are best for our audience here, which are primarily folks who have jobs during the day and are learning to do this in their spare time. And we hope that the times are flexible enough for you to join us in some of these future sessions. Just so you are aware though, everything is recorded and participants have access to those recordings even after a workshop has ended. So life gets in the way, and we do our best to make sure that you are continuing to progress in the workshops if you do end up signing up for one of these opportunities. Everyone receives a certificate of participation from the Climate School after the workshop has ended, and these are fee-based opportunities. The fee for this semester's workshops online are $11.99, so $1,199. And we do have reduced rate options available, whether if you're joining from a group, from an organization, there are several of you who want to participate. If you work for a government agency or a nonprofit, we have those reduced rates available. For the rest of the info session, I'm actually going to turn it over to Martin, who's one of the co-instructors for our decarbonization workshop this spring. So today you'll hear about that workshop. And we have another workshop that's being offered, and that info session is going to be taking place later this month. During the session, if you do have questions that come up, please use the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that and responding. And once Martin is finished with his presentation, we'll open it up for questions that have not been addressed yet. So please use the Q&A box. We're not using the chat or the raising your hand function for this particular webinar. Okay, Martin, so whenever you're ready, I am going to share my screen, and can everyone see those slides? Yes, Martin, you're good?
I'm good. Thank you
Great.
so much, Cassie.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
I hope everyone can hear and see the screen as I do. Thank you so much, Cassie, for the introduction to the program, to the professional learning program. It's a pleasure for me personally to be here. It's the first time that I'm involved in this program with the Climate School. I'm Martin Dietrich Rauch. I'm Senior Legal and Economics Researcher at the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, which is a joint applied research center of the Columbia Law School and the Earth Institute. And I'm one of the facilitators, one of the trainers for this workshop. Very excited to be here with you today. Very brief presentation. If we can go to the next slide, please. The idea really is to give you some of the background, the basic understanding that we hope that you will have for this training and training program, and then go through the workshop overview, the learning objectives that we're setting for this program, also presenting the tentative schedule that we have so far, and outline of sessions, and a bit of detail of what would be discussed in each of those sessions. Then talk a little bit about who we are, myself and Corinne Toledano, the other instructor, and then finally, most importantly, just have some time for your own questions. So if we can go to the next one, please. Starting with, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the very basic starting point of our understanding of the global agenda on sustainability and the climate action. Climate action is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed upon in 2015. If we can go to the next slide. Also, 2015 was the year of the Paris Agreement, of course, and which is an international agreement under the UN Convention on Climate, on UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, setting a path to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas emissions in a way that preserves the equilibrium of our climate system. Several key elements in the Paris Agreement are forward-looking. It strengthens climate action, sets an agenda for adaptation, which is a central pillar in the agreement, sets a long-term goal to achieve net zero emissions in line with that balance of the climate system, provides enhanced transparency and also climate finance for developing countries that will need special assistance to achieve those goals. So the Paris Agreement and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals outline this global consensus on the need to curb climate change, the gases that cause climate change, greenhouse gases, and to achieve sustainable development. And the underlying transitions that are needed to achieve both the SDGs and the climate goals expressed in the Paris Agreement include rapid decarbonization of our global economy and a scale up of technologies to meet the need of a growing and modernizing population. Can we go to the next one, please? So to help operationalize the Paris Agreement goals, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has estimated the carbon budget, or the remaining amount of carbon dioxide that can be emitted, in keeping a reasonable chance of staying within the temperature limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Most fossil fuel reserves, as we see in this chart, are unburnable, cannot be burned if we are to stay within this 1.5 degree, which is what we're aiming at a 50-degree chance. And the next slide, please. As a result of this understanding that we need to decarbonize, countries are starting to set net zero targets. Several have already set these targets by 2050. We have over 100 countries that have set or are considering setting an emissions reduction targets to achieve net zero emissions by mid-century. Over 190 parties to the Paris Agreement, that's essentially universal membership. Several doesn't have already submitted an updated nationally determined contribution explaining how they intend to revolutionize their economies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to achieve these goals. Can we go to the next one, please? So in our workshop, starting from these two starting points, the Paris Agreement on climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals, we will aim at deciphering what exactly decarbonization means in practice, because as we've seen, addressing climate change and achieving sustainable development will depend on decarbonization. The approach will be multidisciplinary. We will look at economics, we'll look at law, we'll look at carbon accounting, ideally giving participants an opportunity to learn about the challenges of decarbonization from various perspectives, at a global level, at a government level, and at a company level. Our presentations will expose participants to various disciplines. So I mentioned international law, economics, development, climate policy, technology, finance, climate accounting, carbon accounting. And the idea for the workshop is that our participants will walk away with a clear idea on why decarbonization is needed and how it can be achieved, the current state of decarbonization policies and practices, and what can be done at various levels to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Can we go to the next one, please? So our learning objectives are to learn about decarbonization pathways, how to make, measure, and monitor progress, how the force of global governance and international law can be leveraged to make progress. I'm actually answering the question, can it be leveraged? Yes, it can. The idea is to explore in our workshop how it can, and ultimately discuss some cases of decarbonization in practice. And I will flesh out each and every one of them in the next slide when I discuss the schedule, the tentative schedule and outline of sessions. So we have a structure here of the first 3 sessions facilitated by myself in the evening Eastern time, and then the 3 final sessions will be facilitated by Preen Toledano. I will tell you a little bit about her later. She is based in a different time zone, so her sessions would be in the morning time. On a Sunday, mine would be on Wednesdays. So the very first session there would be the introduction. What does decarbonization mean for the world? We would examine the main agreements that the world has signed on to that form the decarbonization agenda, dive a little bit more deeply into the Paris Agreement, especially and the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the goal on climate action. Also look into the International Energy Agency and what it has been telling us about pathways for decarbonization, how costly it will be, how better off the world will be with decarbonization, sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize than others, specific challenges that those sectors face, technological promises that are out there that we can explore to help us achieve decarbonization, risks of relying on offsets. You have probably seen, if you've taken a flight in the past few years, there's a lot of there are always offers to abate your emissions by buying offsets, but what does that really mean? Does that really help us decarbonize our economies, or should that be left as a last resort? Then, of course, there's the issue of how developing countries will deal with this in terms of financing, in terms of technology that they need, and bearing in mind that they are the least responsible for the climate crisis. But does it make sense for them to decarbonize as well? Is that where the world is inevitably going? And in that regard, is this, in other words, is this a developed country problem, or is this also a developing country problem? So these issues we would present on and discuss in the very first session, also covering the debate about net zero emissions, and also the equity argument that I was mentioning in terms of developing countries versus developed countries, what is expected of each, what makes sense economically in terms of decarbonization, various other issues in this very first session. Then the second one would focus on how to make, measure, and monitor progress towards decarbonization. A few of the topics that we would look into here would be carbon pricing. What are the global trends in carbon pricing, by which we mean both emissions trading mechanisms, carbon taxes, internal prices that companies have been adopting to price the cost of carbon to drive them to decarbonization. And then we would also look at the tools that companies and countries have to measure their progress towards those goals, and especially looking into the problem of greenhouse gas or carbon accounting, how companies are measuring their emissions in various scopes, which you may have heard of, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. What are the problems with data that companies and countries need to gather to essentially, well, answer the question in the title there, how to make, measure, and monitor progress if you don't have the right data, and if there are various methodologies that you can apply, and there are various sources of data that you can look for to feed into your carbon accounting. So we will explore those issues in this session. Also, carbon disclosures. You are seeing in the news discussions by the SEC in the US, Securities and Exchange Commission, discussing how to require companies to disclose their carbon emissions. You may be also hearing about the EU taxonomy on sustainable activities. How does that all interact and overlap, and how does that reflect on the problems for financing action for climate mitigation and adaptation? And then the third question, can the force of global governance and international law be leveraged to make progress? Here, we will look at the international legal framework that governs investment and assess how it's relevant to the climate change agenda. So we will look at investment treaties and investment chapters in free trade agreements. We'll look into the Energy Charter Treaty, which you may have heard of, which is a treaty that is specifically focused on energy. We will look at the role of these agreements as a barrier or an enabler of decarbonization. For example, how they allow fossil fuel companies to sue governments for climate policy, but also how they allow renewable energies renewable energy companies, to challenge governments for changes in their renewable energy policy. So we'll look at pros and cons and approaches, and especially discussions on how these regimes are increasingly being considered problematic, and how there are several discussions to reform them, and how that reform can and should be structured so that these international agreements can actually encourage investment in the types of technologies that we need to decarbonize: renewable energy, battery storage, clean transportation, greening hard to abate industries, and so on and so forth. So that's for our third session. And then those are the three sessions that I would be presenting to you about. Then the three final ones would be led by Preen Toledano. And the idea here on this second part is to really have a focus on decarbonization in practice. So we would take an example of a country, Paraguay, for which we've written a detailed project, a detailed case study on how to decarbonize Paraguay's economy. CCSI, it was a CCSI study. I was personally involved in writing it, and so was Preen. And the idea for this fourth session is to present a case study based on our study of the Paraguayan case. We essentially looked at 5 parallel transitions that need to happen for the economy to decarbonize: the transition in the infrastructure of the country, the energy economy, land use, job, and legal and policy frameworks in the country, and how we crafted policy and techno-economic recommendations around these transitions to support decarbonization in the energy use sectors in Paraguay through economy-wide decarbonization in electrification, massive energy efficiency gains, behavioral changes, and institutional reforms. We focused in that case study in 4 sectors of Paraguay's economy: electricity, building efficiency, biomass use, and transport. And also have a chapter dedicated to how to finance these transitions. So that's the case study based on a country, but we will also have case studies focusing on 2 sectors. Case study number 2 will be on the oil and gas sector, and case study number 3 on the mining sector. So on the oil and gas sector, of course, the oil and gas sector is a major contributor to the crisis itself. It needs to transition away from oil and gas. And of course, it has a role to play, and it has a role that it is already playing in this transition. We have several studies that look into the contribution of carbon majors in greenhouse gas emissions. We have studies on the contributions of national oil companies in diversifying and moving away from the traditional oil and gas exploration and exploitation model to actually diversifying, to increasingly becoming energy companies that also are considering the needs of the energy transition and decarbonization. And part of this session will be to present our findings in these studies. And then the final case study would focus more on the mining sector. We're doing work for the International Finance Corporation, IFC, with several other partners of ours at CCSI, looking into how to decarbonize the copper and nickel value chains. So not only in mining extraction, but also downstream as these metals are processed, how to improve the processes to reduce carbon emissions throughout the value chain. We would bring lessons learned from those studies, and also studies that we're undertaking in how to reposition mining companies as materials companies, just as oil and gas companies are repositioning themselves as energy companies. We advocate for mining companies to reposition themselves in a circular economy, working not only with primary extraction of minerals and metals, but also getting more involved in the recycling market, and in the recycling market, and the reuse of tailings, and several other activities that would also help reduce emissions from primary extraction. And of course, in parallel to that repositioning, also greening and decarbonizing their own operations, using more and more renewable electricity to power mining operations. So that's a very tight overview of what we're going to cover in the schedule in the sessions. Next, please, very briefly, just to say a few words about who we are, where we're coming from. So we're the Columbus Center on Sustainable Investment. Our mission is to develop and advance policies and practices for both governments and companies in a way that these policies and practices will shape investments to contribute rather than undermine sustainable development. We have various work streams. Both Perrine and I are affiliated with our mining and energy work stream, which is within CCSI, one of the work streams that's involved in cross-cutting research on climate change. So it's, of course, our focus is more on the energy transition, on extractive markets, among other areas, and we do this cross-cutting work on climate change, supporting decarbonization efforts by companies and countries. Briefly about ourselves, Perrine leads the mining and energy work stream. She's been doing research, training, advisory projects on the impact of the energy transition, on extractive industry investments, on resource-rich countries, and also on the deployment of large-scale investments in renewable energy, zero-carbon industrialization, economy-wide decarbonization. She has a Master's of Business Administration from ESSEC in Paris, France, a Master of Public Administration from Columbia University, and you're welcome to check out her longer bio on our website. I myself conduct economic and legal research and training and advisory work at CCSI, focusing also on extractive industries in the context of sustainable development and the zero carbon transition. And I lead the center's work, the cross-cutting work on climate investment policy. I have experience as an international law advisor in a global think tank before I joined CCSI. And my academic background, I hold a master's in law from New York University and a Bachelor of Laws and of Economics from my home university back in Brazil, where I'm originally from. So back to you, Cassie, and sorry if I took a little bit longer than expected, but very eager to hear questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin, so much for that. So we don't currently have any questions. So for our viewers, if you do have questions, feel free to type it into the Q&A box now. And I just want to wrap up by saying, you know, these are really exciting opportunities that we're offering, and we are trying to determine the best content to put out there. So appreciate you joining us to learn more about this session. So there's a question about the sessions, interactive, would they be with the other participants? Martin, I'll open this up to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David, for the question. So the idea is to make the sessions as interactive as we can. We will, of course, have a bit of a initial presentation to just set the context, but the focus then is to have a conversation with participants on their experiences, on what they take out of the materials that we present. We will suggest readings. We understand, as Cassie has explained, it's not a degree program. They're not required readings. But we have suggested readings because there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can learn about this beyond a 2.5-hour session. My goal for the sections is to make them interactive in breakout rooms, having polls, having quick questions and discussions, and also in the group, depending on how many participants we have, we might actually not need breakout rooms. It will depend on how we go there.
I'll take the next two questions. Thank you, Martin, about a maximum number of spots. So we have not yet enforced a cap on the workshops. We had a fairly large workshop last semester, just to give you an example, on a very popular topic. And we had 35 participants in the workshop, and between people perhaps joining a little late and not being able to make certain sessions, there were also and the instructors making time to ensure that questions are answered and addressed. There wasn't an issue with something of that size. So if we go anything above 50, I would say we would reconsider a cap, because we want to make sure that these are small enough so that people can have small and big enough so that people can have meaningful conversations. We've had smaller workshops where there were very few participants, and that made the discussions challenging. I should also say that having a slightly larger group was beneficial because it's very interesting, the backgrounds of individuals who sign up for these workshops. We've had everyone from graduate students enrolled in other institutions to early career folks, to folks who have been in the industries that they're working in for 20 plus years, to individuals who have retired and are just looking for an additional way to get involved in climate change conversations and to get engaged with the content. So a larger group is beneficial from that sense in terms of connecting with different individuals and networking. But we are the soft cap is approximately 50. We will reconsider and based on the instructors and what they're also comfortable with. So I know that that there is we will close the deadline to register for this workshop 2 weeks in advance of the workshop starting. But for now, there's no sort of immediate rush to sign up right after this info session. We will share some additional information with all of you. But we do have, we would like everyone to sign up 2 weeks before the session starts, just so the instructors have a good idea and get to know the participants a little in terms of their backgrounds, and to tweak the content to tailor some of those backgrounds in the workshop. Okay, great. And Robert has a question that I am going to turn over to Martin.
Fantastic. Robert's question?
Yes.
Yes. So the question was, would we also cover early retirement of coal-fired power plants at scale as a decarbonization pathway and its financial and societal challenges? And the answer is yes, we would. We would cover early retirement of coal-fired power plants as an environmental necessity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also as something that makes sense economically because of the costs of alternative technologies that are cleaner. So we would definitely, this is of course not one of the case studies that we added here, right? Because we would focus on oil and gas, not so much on coal, precisely because the case for coal is a bit more obvious than oil and gas especially. But this will certainly be covered, especially in the session on international law that I mentioned, those agreements that are being used precisely by coal companies that are seeing those phase outs in some countries that are already going there, early retirement of these plants, and using those agreements to challenge government policy that does precisely that. So, so this is definitely an area of study that we've looked into and that we'll cover in the workshop.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'll take the typical profile. So I have, as I mentioned previously, we have quite a range. And it's, we have found that the profile of the participants here are either those who are interested in the topic because they're currently working in the field, or they're interested in the topic for personal, professional, and lifelong learning reasons, or they're interested in the field because they're interested in, and they might not necessarily be currently working in the field, but they might want to pivot their careers towards something in the area. So there is no typical profile, which I think makes the workshops extremely interesting, because everyone has their own experiences and insights to bring to the workshop. And you know, we have had quite a range, and you know, yes, we have also definitely had individuals from tech companies, startups, those looking, we actually had, I believe, had an angel investor or a seed investor for startups joining our session last semester. And while he is not necessarily trained in sort of science and climate, and he is in a position to be able to fund organizations and startups who are interested in addressing climate change challenges. So it's really a wide range of profiles. Let's say there's no typical profile, and that's what makes these workshops extremely interesting and valuable. Yeah. Okay, Martin. Actually, I'm happy to take this one. So there's recommended readings, no tests. There's no grading of any kind, no homework assignments. The discussions are really, and the content that you receive make up the bulk of the workshops. With recommended readings, as Martin said, we share those, we make those available. During and after the workshops, there is nothing beyond that is mandatory. And you know, if, like I said at the beginning, and if you also have to miss a session here or there, it's all good. And the instructors are available for questions, and based on requests, may also choose to do office hours, depending on participants and if they've missed a session and would like to catch up a little bit with some questions. So yeah, hopefully that that is helpful. Great questions. Thank you, everyone. And I think those have helped bring out points that we haven't necessarily covered. So appreciate you tuning in. So as I mentioned, we will make the recording available. Yes, we'll make the recordings available for both the info session as well as all of the sessions that take place. So we will use Zoom, and we keep the recordings available during the course of the workshop, but we also keep them available for all participants afterwards if you want to go and revisit something, or if you miss a session and want to rewatch it because there was content that you wanted to review. So yes, everything is recorded and made available. Great. Martin, before we wrap up, any last words you want to share with our viewers here?
I wanted to quickly add to the question on the profile, and perfectly answered by Cassie by saying there's no exact profile. And just to highlight that Preen and I are both very used to working with a range of stakeholders, I should say, from government, from academia, from NGOs, think tanks, and companies of various sectors. And I think the richness of this program precisely will drive from this diversity of backgrounds that this type of program usually attracts and makes the discussions even more enriching. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm seeing your names here in the list of participants, and hope to see you registered a couple of months from now.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Martin, for your time and for sharing an overview of what the workshop would offer. Thank you to our participants who have tuned in. You'll be hearing from me by the end of the week with a follow-up to the presentation here. And in the meantime, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself. You all have my email. And if you have any additional questions for Martin, I'll be sure that he also receives those questions with respect to content. Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in this future session. All right, thanks, everyone.